Thanks, and welcome everybody to our second set of panels of the day. There are 3 parallel panels right now, and you're in the one on LMSs, learning management systems like Blackboard, Canvas, D2L, and so on, and gradebooks, and generally recording grades, dealing with grades, communicating with students about grades. So I first want to remind you that, here we go, we're recording this, and we plan to post the recordings and the slides so you can review them later, and we have the rights to rebroadcast those and distribute the recording. And so by participating, you're agreeing that your contributions can become part of that record. And that includes—
You're not screen sharing.
Well, that's interesting. Thank you. Okay, here we go again. So we were just sitting there chatting and I wasn't screen sharing the whole time. All right, and so to finish the spiel, and now you can see the words as well, that by participating, you're agreeing that your contributions become part of that record. That includes video for the panelists and audio chat and Q&A for everybody. So with that, I'm going to very briefly introduce our panelists and then have each of them talk for 5-ish minutes, introduce themselves, say a little about their institution and their classes, and how they deal with LMSs, gradebooks, and so on. So our panelists for this will be Rebecca Gasper from Creighton University, Sharona Krinsky from CSU Los Angeles, and Taylor Short from Grand Valley State University. And I am David Clark from Grand Valley State University. So I'm going to start by handing it over to Rebecca Gasper, who will tell us a little bit.
Hi, so I'm Rebecca Gasper. My pronouns are she, her. I'm from Creighton University, which is in Omaha, Nebraska, the land of the Omaha people, and also the we've had Mr. Skurlock recently died in the news, so that's to place Omaha for you. It's been a little bit tense. On Twitter, I'm at Random Cashew. My email is there, and I was going to leave you all a text service, but I'm not. I'm forwarding from my office right now, so you could call my landline. It'll be great. But you could contact me in the future with my email or my Twitter very quickly. Go ahead. So we have about 4,000 undergraduate students and another 4,000 that are pre-medical. We have a huge pre-med education system going on. Some of them are bio majors, some of them are medical math majors, some of them are so many other things, even to dance. 26% of our students are people of color. We have very high tuition and fees, but I'm always really careful to generalize. You know, if this works for most students, does it work for all of my students? And I try not to generalize. Small department, and we use Canvas. So just a quick introduction, to the classes I teach. To answer that question, I teach kind of everything. A lot of my pure math colleagues will teach the linear algebra, for instance, but I'm applied math and I teach everything from like our terminal math courses like Math in the Modern World, pre-calculus for business. I guess that's going to turn into a stats or data science this fall. And then calculus, and Calc 2, and up to the modeling, upper division modeling in math biology. That's been a fun course. So just really quick to go over the things that I use. These are sort of basic features. Keep a backup somewhere. Like I have backups in Excel. But in Canvas, one thing that's easy is to just use 0-point dummy assignments. And with that, you can link a deadline, you can give a submission box, that sort of thing. You can also link rubrics to that if you want. And on the left, you can see I have 2 categories for grades in that class. This was a couple years ago, where I had an SBG tracking category, and they would know to ignore the percentages. And then you would see your SBG grade, which was actually part of your grade, which said that you were getting an A or a B or a C. Next slide, please. And then I started, like, since 2018, I just, kept learning more of the features, and they've added more features. So Canvas has this mastery gradebook, and you can see 2 different mastery gradebooks. One of them is on the left, it's for a Math in the Modern World course, where I wanted them sort of project-based. And for that project-based course, I would just see if they had gotten their projects passed or not passed yet, and they could reassess with tokens. And then on the right, you see a course that's a calc course, and you could see, you know, like drill down, and there's an optimization one. I can link that optimization outcome and a big description down below to, you know, advanced proficiency, proficient, apprentice, novice, and down. This was one where I used a huge grading scale, and I wouldn't do that again either. But just to see two different ways to use outcomes in Canvas to link them to your grades. Go ahead. So you tell the students to go to the Learning Mastery gradebook, not to the regular gradebook. And I think now you can turn the regular gradebook off, but I'm not positive. Sharona can confirm that in a second. But you could see under applications of derivatives, there are 5 problems, 5 assessments on it, on A1 of applications of derivatives. So one is a quiz, one was a midterm. 2 of them were retakes that I offered in my office, not every day, but like on a retake day. So come in during these 6 hours and you could take as many as you want. So they could do that twice during the semester. And then finally the final exam, it was on there as well. So that's what the students will see, and they can drill up and down from that.
Thank you very much. Let's see. We have one question so I'm going to generally ask clarifying questions or immediate ones for one panelist right after they've spoken, and otherwise I will hold off any questions you put in the Q&A and ask the whole panel afterwards. And so Rebecca, there is one question, which is, can you explain the SVG tracking thingies a little bit more?
Sure. So the SVG tracking were just to track each attempt on a particular standard. And it would be a particular assignment would have, you know, 3 different SVG tracking thingies on it maybe, or can you back up a couple slides, David?
Yep, I will. This one?
There, yes, yep. Perfect. So I had one category that just had their grade in it, and that would be updated. So it would be like your grade as of midterms was, you know, an A, and so I just enter 95. But on the other hand, each assignment, you could see quiz 3, quiz 4, quiz 5, SVG test 1. Those were individual events, and I could have deadlines on those. They were assignments. Each of these is an assignment that I create, but some of them are worth points and some of them aren't. Some of them I enter manually, like their grade, and some of them are more automated. Have I clarified that? Okay.
All right. So for now, I'd like to move on to Sharona Krinsky from California State, Los Angeles. So Sharona, take it away.
Thank you. Okay, so I'm Sharona, of course, Cal State LA. We are about 23,000 undergraduate students, give or take, on our campus. We are what is termed a Hispanic serving institution. Over 80% of our undergraduates and graduate students are Hispanic. We also have about 9% Blacks, and then we have Asians, and I think our whites are about 4%, something like that. We are one of the highest for housing and food insecure students. We have over 10% of our students that are housing insecure. We also serve primarily, we draw our students from the East LA area, East LA and South LA. So we definitely are servicing, we're basically an urban school district with a high level of first generation and Pell recipients. So pretty much if you've got every disadvantage coming into college, those are our students. And so this is the environment we're working in. We have a very large engineering school. So we do have a lot of students that go into engineering. We also have a large nursing school, Health and Human Services College. So we do service a lot of health and human services students, as well as psychology and other supports. So as a result of all the budget cuts in California back in the Great Recession, we have about 14 or 14 and a half tenure and tenure line faculty. And depending on the semester, we can have up to 80 contingent lecturers and or grad students. We do give master's degrees, so we do have grad students, but they definitely oftentimes we'll even teach entire sections. One of the things that we're very grateful for is every single math class is capped at 25. Sometimes we creep up to 27 in an individual course, but almost always it's 25. So we've been able to keep our course sizes down, which is one reason we have so many contingent faculty. That's my email address. My Twitter handle is @SouthBaySharona. This is one of the reasons I struggle with titles, is because in my non-working world, my name Sharona is part of my brand. So whether or not to do that at the university, we're definitely I'm grappling with that right now. Okay, David, can I have the next slide? So we went to Canvas about 3 years ago at the university, and basically Canvas has an option to turn on a Learning Mastery gradebook. They do not have currently the option to turn off the main gradebook, so I'm going to show you both views of that gradebook. And Canvas gives you several choices on how to track mastery through the Mastery gradebook. So this is different than how, Rebecca, I don't think you're using the actual Mastery gradebook. You might have been, I just didn't see it. So your choices are decaying average, and you set basically the decaying average weights the most recent the most, and you decide that's how much, and all the previous attempts at that particular standard goes into the other amount. You can also do n number of times, which is what I do. I do 2 times mastery. You can also pick the highest score or the most recent score, and you have the control to define the mastery level, to define the weights for the decaying average, and to define what the n is for the n number of times. David, next slide. Here's the key idea. Simple is better. I did decaying average for about 1.5 years, and it was so confusing to the students that I basically had to explain literally what a decaying average was all the time. And it really took away from the mastery grading. So I don't use that anymore. And I've gone to 2 times mastery. Next one. So this is what the Canvas gradebook looks like from the student view. If you notice, there's 2 tabs here. One is the assignments, one is the learning mastery. And now I remember, Rebecca, that I did see you show this. But this is what I do. So I do have, notice there are some points in here. I have one standard that I call the PPP. It's preparation, participation, and practice. It's a points accumulation standard. And it's basically, you know, there's like 1,200 points available. And if you get 1,000, you've got mastery. Now I put this red arrow on here. You notice the little exclamation point in the circle. That's what happens when you tell Canvas to not include an assignment in the calculation of the final grade. So this TAMS assignment, which stands for Task for Mastering Statistics, this is a statistics sample. This is a mastery assignment. So you can see it has no points, and Canvas is not counting it into the final grade. Next one, David. This is the same view of the same student, but now on the Learning Mastery tab. And you can see that when it's rolled up, it says how many standards they've mastered. And when it's expanded, it uses the mastered, non-mastered badges. So as a student is able to master, and you can see the alignments that says how many assignments are assessing that particular standard. This is the instructor view. So as the students earn mastery, again, in this case, it's because it's multiple times mastery, it's all green. If you're using decaying average, it'll show oranges and reds. Basically, until a student gets mastery, they don't show up, they have a blank. Notice one of them says 3.5. Canvas will average all successful mastery attempts, and I was using a 4-level grading rubric. I'm going to be going to 3 levels in the fall. This is year 1 BC. This is before Canvas. So I was doing mastery grading, but I didn't have access to Canvas. So I did a word mail merge based on Excel. So on the top, you see this is my Excel sheet showing what they've scored on their different attempts. And then the bottom is a mail merge that I did in Word for each student, and I would print this out maybe every 3, 4 weeks, 2 weeks, something like that. And it would tell them where they stand on their standards. And they had to get a 3 overall to get something mastered.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Are there any immediate clarifying questions for Sharona? I see. Yep, here we go from Nina. It's a question for Sharona, but also possibly Rebecca about Canvas. How flexible are the alignments of the assignments and the outcomes? So that is, can you decide that a given assignment can meet different outcomes for different students. For example, if students had a choice of what homework problems to submit.
So it's flexible in the sense that for each assignment that you're assessing mastery, you pick which outcomes, in other words, which standards go for that one, but it does apply across the board to the students. But if you leave it blank, it doesn't count in. Certainly for N times mastery, it's very easy because you don't care how many things are in there. In terms of the decaying average, if I recall correctly, if you leave it blank, it doesn't worry about it. But if you put in something lower, it will average it in. I don't remember entirely.
I'll just add, like, I'll create a test assignment or a quiz assignment, and I will add in the rubrics, I will add a rubric for each assessment that's meant. So maybe I'll add a rubric for A1 and then A3 and then A3 and then A2, and then it doesn't even have to be in order. You just one for each problem. Or if you have a problem that meets 2 standards, go ahead and add a rubric twice. You can add a rubric twice if there are 2 problems for it. It's very easy to add in Canvas compared to other things.
And there is a mention here that I will toss to the panelists because I don't know if this is practical at all. Is there a way to share or invite people into a model Canvas course at all who could see how some of this looks? Perhaps not right now, but is that something we could share after the conference?
Yeah, I actually have one in the free Canvas. I don't know how out of date it is, so it is definitely doable.
It's possible.
Someone has to
Okay.
remind me to do it though.
We will keep that in mind to hopefully share afterwards. Let's see. All right, so we have a couple questions having to do with Excel, and so I think that's probably a separate topic that we will talk about afterwards. Right now, I would like to turn it over to Taylor Short.
Hi, I'm Taylor Short. I'm at Grand Valley State University in the Department of Mathematics. GVSU has about 25,000 students. Math classes are, most of them are capped at either 24 or 30 students. I've been using Mastery Grading for 4 to 5 years. I have used Mastery Grading in Calc 1, Calc 2, Calc 3, and 3 different discrete math courses. 2 courses for computer science majors and 1 discrete math course for math majors. The LMS that we use at Grand Valley is Blackboard. You can go to the next slide. So Blackboard does not have a mastery grade function like Canvas. So what I have here is just a snapshot of my gradebook. So I use a 4-level rubric, but what we're looking at here are my learning targets. These are the basic skills of the course, and I grade these with just 3 grades, M for mastery, P for progressing, and N for needs revision. And only a grade of M for mastery earns credit. And so each column is a different standard, and what I simply do in the gradebook is just track every attempt the student makes for a particular standard separated by commas. I track the grades. So this is a really simple system. It's easy for me, it's easy for the students, and I like it because I can quickly see how many times someone has attempted a standard. And their grade progression as well. I'm looking in the chat and I see a quick question. What is P comma M? That means a student got a P the first attempt and an M the second attempt that they were looking at that learning target. So Blackboard really wants you to enter things in points.
I'm sorry. Guess what the scroll wheel does.
Yeah.
We're going to talk to Sharona for a minute here. Okay.
So on the right side, I have just how you configure the columns. If you're familiar with Blackboard, that should look familiar if you use the Grade Center. Name the column something, but all I do is select primary display text, and then you can't quite see it, but you do have to fill in points possible. I just make that 0. So one I guess one thing about the system, we're using grading this way, is you can't actually calculate overall grades in Blackboard. You do have to export to Google Sheets or Excel, but it's a pretty simple formula to Excel formula to calculate the number of M's that a student masters in a row and divided by the total number of objectives or standards. You can go to the next slide. Another thing I use in Blackboard is grading schemas. So this is an option in the Grade Center under Tools. You go to Grading Schema, you can create your own. I've named mine Mastery here. And to use a schema, all you do is you select, so once you create this, Mastery will appear as an option when you're, so on the previous slide where we selected text as the primary display, you would see Mastery as an option there. And so what I use this for is mainly the left side of this table down here that I filled out. I basically, schemas allow you to enter point values in, and then those point values will appear as a letter grade in the gradebook. So I just finagled this so that I could enter 1, 2, 3, 4 for the 4 levels of grades that I have. And this is especially handy in Blackboard if you use Blackboard assignments. These are, you can create a Blackboard assignment that allows a student to upload their document directly to Blackboard, and then you can view and grade and leave comments on the assignment in Blackboard. However, when you do that, Blackboard does not let you use text grades. So what you see on the right is what you have to enter for the grade. You have to use a number, but schemas allow you to enter a number. So I've entered 3 out of 4, and that would convert to an M in the gradebook. One thing I've also done with schemas is on this right side of the table. So grades manually entered as E, M, P, N, and then you see percentages on the right side. I haven't filled in those percentages. Blackboard automatically updated those. But you could enter values in. You could make Mastery 100%. And then you could actually calculate overall grades in Blackboard using a weighted column. You could calculate the total number of objectives mastered divided by the total number. And I think that's all I had.
Thank you very much. You were actually just beginning to address this at the end, Taylor, so I'll ask you this question from the Q&A, but then also open it up to our other panelists, which is, how do you use the LMS to help students figure out what their current grade is if you're using one of these systems?
Yes.
Or do you?
I have the students mostly track their grades on their own. All of my Mastery grades, I do percentages for the different things. So they all convert to percentages, sorry. So it's always the total number possible divided by, or sorry, the total number they mastered over the total possible. But I do regularly check grades myself, either weekly or biweekly, and reach out to students if I feel like I need to.
Rebecca or Sharona, do you have anything to add about how do you use the gradebook, the LMS gradebook itself, to communicate overall grade?
So in the simple example, in my simplest example, I just had a column where I entered their grade that counted for their grade. Sorry, I make you go back.
Okay.
One more. There it is.
Here?
Yeah, so the SBG grade current, that's where I just put 95 and it translates as an A. So in that example, it's really simple. You enter like something that corresponds to a letter grade, or you enter a letter grade instead of a percent, and it'll show them that. That's one way to do it. I have them do it with paper, and then in the student gradebook, they can see the number that they're getting right. But I agree that I need to do something supplementary to my Canvas gradebook. Sharona has better ideas. Go ahead, Sharona.
So I do want to ask quick as a clarification. So Rebecca, you mentioned keep a backup, right? So you have a separate spreadsheet somewhere that you are keeping information in as well to get that percentage from.
That's true. And my gradebook just has them like transposed and color coded. So it's not super different from, I've gone over multiple iterations of this, but yeah. I keep everything separate, and color coding them really helps me get it. But I can also just say the highest and attempts. You can get that in Canvas. So,
Sharona, did you want to add to that?
Sure. Why don't I, David, I'm going to share my screen because I think this will work better if I actually share it live. So I have a sandbox course in Canvas that I am using to kind of show things off. This is the Instructor View, and you can see I have some dummy students in here. Bosley, who you've seen on some of the other things, is one of them. Owen, who's one of our moderators, is on here. And so this is the view for the instructor. And again, in my course, all that matters is how many of you accomplished. If you get 15 or more, you're at a C. If you're 17 or more, you're a B. If you're 19 or more, you're an A. So the individual student, and hopefully you guys are seeing this well, I'm assuming. The individual student sees this, and when they click on their learning mastery, it shows this. And yeah, can you guys see that the C1 and C2 is mastered? Is that showing for you guys?
Looks like we can view that, yep.
Okay, so this particular student has mastered C1, and they can see which standards they actually did it on and which ones have not yet been assessed. So for my students, it's pretty straightforward, although it takes a lot of conversation to convince them to get on this tab and not on the assignments tab. The assignments tab is where I track my triple P. So did that answer the question? I think
that we got there. Sharona, there's a specific question for you that in an earlier session, you mentioned that you can upload your objectives into Canvas all at once from a spreadsheet rather than creating them one at a time. Can you comment on that?
Yeah, Canvas has a sample of how you upload your standards. It is almost like a programming thing where you literally have to write your standard in a specific format in a CSV file. And when you go to outcomes, which I guess that's another part we have to show then. Let me share one more time. The way you get your standards into Canvas is their outcomes. And when you're setting up your outcomes, you can see I have a variety of them. You can upload them by doing an import, and you want to follow the format that they provide. So these are all the individual outcomes that are set up for what the method of calculation is and what the rubric levels are. And these are all things that you set when you set up outcomes, which are our standards.
And since we're on Canvas right now, so I'll ask a question. I'm not sure if this was answered or not. On Canvas, is it straightforward to keep track of separate objectives that are in the same assignment?
Yes, I guess is the answer. So I
think that's what you were showing us by which assignments align with which objectives.
So if I have a quiz, I have a rubric affiliated with this quiz, and it has the standards that are on that quiz. So you just make this rubric by just adding an outcome from your set of standards that you've created. So it's all self-contained and all interconnected in Canvas. So each time that you build an assignment, you can put a rubric on it. And I noticed that someone had asked about outcomes provided with the questions from a question bank. So yes, please be aware that this is an area where Canvas can be very dangerous. So one of the things that Canvas does is it likes to let you have access to things from multiple courses. But if you pull in like an assignment from another course, you're going to pull the outcomes with it. And I say this because I've done it at least 10 times. And then you have to very quickly figure out how to get rid of those extra outcomes. So this is one of those things that it's very useful and very dangerous at the same time.
So Taylor, onto Blackboard here. And I'm curious about this because I'm trying to remember if this is the case. Michelle says in Blackboard, there's one column that is always set. It says as the external grade, but I'm recalling as like an overall average. And there's no way to turn it off. How do you deal with that? Do you know of this?
Yes, I usually hide it, and I don't know if that hides it from student view.
And I think that, that's my memory also, is that there's a hide from instructor and a hide from student that are separate. So
yeah, I usually do both of those, and then it's not an issue.
And I think that's a very important thing for any people using an LMS, is to be aware that sometimes LMSs are trying to report information that you don't want them to, and students don't know to filter that, essentially. So a student view, or just asking a student to show you what they can see, can be really helpful. Bradford in the chat says you can hide it from everyone and remove it from showing in Blackboard. Yep, and that seems sensible. There's I've seen a bit going by in the chat also about people who use Google Sheets or sharing Google Sheets with students, and a comment to be very careful about how your institution feels about FERPA with regards to that. And different institutions have very different feelings about the exact same things when it comes to using web-based things that aren't Blackboard, Canvas, or a few others. But there are definitely ways to do that. Let's talk a little bit about using maybe an Excel spreadsheet or something. So Sharona, you had mentioned this. I've done this before. I'm not sure if Taylor or Rebecca have, in terms of recording mastery, even if it's just for your own records in an Excel spreadsheet. So could you give us an overview of what that looked like? Like, what did you actually record? How did you use numbers, or did you use letters to do that? How did it work out?
Sure. I mean, I have old samples if you guys really want to see them, but basically I had a massive spreadsheet where every assessment had its own tab, and it had the list of students and it had the list of standards. And then I would roll up from that individual assessment up into a cover sheet that had each student in one single line. And from there, I did a mail merge onto those individual Word grade reports. And I always used numbers when I was using that, because I was doing a decaying average at the time. And I tend to, even with Mastery, I tend to use it because I was on a 4-3-2-1. At least they got that it was more like a GPA thing and a little bit less of a points thing. And because Canvas does need to use the points to do its back-end calculations, I kind of switch back and forth from M and 3 interchangeably. But yeah, definitely for Excel spreadsheets, there's a lot of options. It does require some programming, but I did get it to the point where it wasn't so bad to actually just generate those grade reports every couple of weeks.
Taylor or Rebecca, would you like to say anything about using Excel and recording for yourself?
Sure, I use Excel or Google Sheets depending on the semester, just to back everything up. And you can do a mail merge once a semester on paper, just that students who don't understand the Canvas or whatever can see it on paper. The nice thing about doing a mail merge from Excel, say, is that you can add words like, hey, don't forget to come to my office hours now that you have this information. Again, it's using the grades as feedback. So what to do next really is the question that comes out of, oh, I have an advisory grade of blank at midterm. I should really do something about that. So that's the nice thing about Excel, is it lets you add words once you mail merge it.
So I will mention I've done this also, and I've gone to extremes, like Sharona said, of programming, and I've become much simpler recently. And let me just mention, in Excel, if you're thinking of highest grade or your highest mark is what you use to determine mastery, that's probably the simplest, and you use the max function, right? Just take the maximum of all these things, and a few other relatively straightforward Excel formulas. And I highly recommend using numbers for your own internal representation, right? Just 1, 2, 3, 4, like Taylor had said, for recording, or even just 0, 1, depending on how many levels you want to record.
Dave, can I make one overall comment?
Mm-hmm.
This is not specific to mastery grading, but whatever your institution uses as its primary tool, I strongly recommend using that tool as your primary choice as best you can. It is very hard cognitively on the students to be learning multiple systems. So if your institution uses Blackboard, as much as I love Canvas, I don't recommend going to the free Canvas and doing it there. It's too hard on the students to keep having to jump different systems. So if you can encourage your institution to choose an LMS, and yeah, maybe you have to supplement it with Excel. But honestly, I have 2 teenagers, and they had their teachers went from, you know, the high school website to Edlio to Edmodo to Google Classroom to Microsoft Teams in about a week, and it was head exploding. So regardless of the fact that I love Canvas and I think it's phenomenal and I want everyone to be able to use it, I don't recommend doing it if your institution has not adopted it.
Absolutely second that, right? Use what you have, and there is a way to do that. So a question that I have is, have any of you worked or at any point had asked students to keep track of their own grades? Of course, assuming you are keeping track of it as well, but to ask students to record it on their own. And how did that work for you? How did you do it?
There is one course that I have used full master grading for every component of the grade in. Usually I use it for portions, say like for quiz portion, and my administrators are more happy with that. But the one time that I used it, which was recently, for the entire grade of the course, I gave students a paper at the beginning and told them how to count things and told them which things to count and highlighted them. And they were business students, and even though it's just a paper spreadsheet, they could not do it. But basically it's the same things that you would be writing down in your Excel. You know, you say standard 1, blank, 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 standard 2, blank, 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 and then count and COUNTIF and vSearch and, or VLOOKUP rather, all those things, but it's just on paper. Be careful telling students to use it. It should be instructive, but there's a cognitive jump there to get them to use it correctly.
So we do use a tracking worksheet in statistics, which again, I can show you. We're always revising this, but this is in our intro stats class. So this is our tracking worksheet, and it shows each mastery assessment and which assessments it is tracked on. And you're supposed to put a checkbox every time you get mastery. And when there's 2 in a row, you're supposed to check it in the last column on the right. But as Rebecca said, getting them to use it right is very tricky. But we're asking them constantly. We're like, did you update it? Did you update it? Did you update it? So.
I'm going to try to share something similar that I have used. And I find that this is something very useful because you can always reframe things in terms of asking a student what their records say, right? So making sure to put a little bit of the onus on them and then comparing to what you have. And that can just be a useful framing for things. So what I'm looking to share with you is here. So a slightly different format from Sharona, but you can see that there are 1, 2, 3, 4 grade categories. And each of those I listed here, check off each of these boxes as you finish them. And once you've checked them off into the A range, you have an A. So how many professionally communicated proofs? Your first 4 get you up to a D, your next few get you up to a C, and so on beyond that. So this is a similar way to ask students to do this. This was in the paper copy of the syllabus that I gave them at the start of the semester. Okay.
Dave, you're getting a request to share that, so we'll want to
get
that out in the future.
Absolutely. Yes, I would be very happy to share that. Are there other questions that anyone would like to put in the Q&A right now? I haven't been tracking the chat carefully. So I'll ask our panelists this question right now. What is something that you would suggest? So we've given some definitely do things this way bits of advice. Is there anything you would say definitely don't do this, or this was a mistake I made early on to watch out for?
Well, I'll reiterate the problem with outcomes in Canvas. If you think you're going to want to use an assignment that you built in another course into a course you already have and you already have outcomes, what I'd recommend is copying that assignment over to a sandbox, stripping the rubric off, and then bringing it in, because otherwise, even if it's the same outcomes, you're going to duplicate them and they don't add up properly. So that's my number one thing as far as using Canvas with outcomes.
Any other suggestions for things to watch out for or definitely don't do?
I'll say in my first semesters of using mastery grading, there were certain things that I only tracked the last attempt for, and I only recorded that one grade in my grade book. But I found it a little frustrating at times to not know like how many times they'd actually attempted something, or what they had done previously on this particular assignment. So I really encourage you to track multiple grades within each assignment and have those easily visible.
I'm trying to think what I would add. One of the general mastery grading things is everyone is sort of moving from having lots and lots of levels like EM, RN, maybe down to just a couple, like passed, not yet passed, or like sort of not attempted X0 type thing. I guess I would also just, I think the first few times I did this, I really made the mistake of having the LMS be a place where like I can count it, why can't you? But really just the mistake I made was not updating them on their grades more often. Our department certainly has that culture where if the students don't know their grade on any particular week that's up to date, like you're behind and that's your responsibility. So that was a mistake I made for a while. Either have your LMS compute it more regularly or push their grade to them more regularly in a different communication.
I'd like to reiterate what Rebecca said. It's so easy to make these systems really complicated because they make sense to us. So having, you know, multiple levels, having get this many M's and this many E's, and this is how you get from an A to an A+, students cannot follow it. The simpler you can make it, the more straightforward, the easier it is for you and for them, and the less choices that you'll have to make that might be a little bit more subjective that you haven't been transparent about. Simpler is better, at least in the level of the classes I teach, which is up through Calculus 3 and now linear algebra. I really can't speak to the first course because never taught it, no idea what I would do there.
I absolutely agree. I want to really re-emphasize what Sharona said there. Simplicity, when you have your head wrapped around a system, it seems simpler than it does to your students. And so it is worth working on simplicity there. There was a question I just actually typed an answer in the Q&A, but I will mention here. The question was really about, in my system, how, what if a student reaches an A in a bunch of levels and a D in another? And the main thing that I wanted to emphasize about that is I would actually simplify that system compared to the last time I used it, and have fewer grade categories so that it's simpler for students to see where they are. And there's fewer ways for them to be out of sync and sort of earning an A in one level and a D in another. So this is a question that's not directly related to recording grades, but it's definitely related to how we use grades. How do you compute midterm grades? Especially in a class where, in order to reach a C, you have to achieve a bunch of things that by midterm time, they probably haven't even been able to complete all of those.
This doesn't translate to midterm grades very well. That's the biggest answer. But say you have 20 standards or 18 standards maybe that you want to save the highest 3 attempts in. At midterm, you want to look at not just the first 8 standards, but actually like the first 6 standards and look at their highest 2 attempts on those and say, based on this progress, you might get a blank. So you need the secondary scale for midterm to say what % of the first 2 attempts would be kind of on track.
I'm spoiled. We don't do midterm grades. And I another metaphor I use, which is I call it climbing the mountain, and we're all starting at the bottom of the mountain, and you don't expect to get to the top of the mountain until you're done with your journey, and this class is a journey. So again, I really hate watching my own children start their classes at 100% because they get the syllabus signed off and they spend the entire rest of the semester dropping in their grade. I loathe that about the K-12 piece of what my kids are in. So I don't know how to do midterm grades because I would think that they would be very disheartening because, you know, at the end of the day, most of my students get A's and B's. So.
Yeah, I saw David typed in the chat. GBSU, I've only had to fill out a few midterm grades for the courses that I've been teaching recently. And I don't have a great answer for this, but what I have been doing is looking at things that are graded for, I have all sorts of different categories. I look at things that are graded for completion and kind of heavily weight those and look at where the student's tracking, and then kind of look at their how many standards they've mastered, and then just kind of give my best estimate based on that.
I want to add something really quick. It's going on in the chat, the idea to use either an on-track or a not on-track grade. Kate Fish says she uses B's or D's for on-track or not on-track. And I saw this in an earlier session too, where you shouldn't assign maybe an A or an F at midterms, because it's really hard to say that you would go that low or that high at that point. So just to amplify that, one mistake I made earlier is I have given Fs, especially when I have used flexible end of semester deadlines and students weren't on track to pass. I would not do that again. I would not give Fs at midterm unless a student has not shown up.
I absolutely agree. I think at most institutions that require midterm grades, you're using that grade to send a message either to somebody administratively that they need to contact the student, or to the student. And so you need to have a secondary way to translate it. And I really like Kate's B or D option, right? On track or not on track. Something that Tom had said also in the chat is that when he's forced to input midterm grades, he forces himself to write one to two sentences for each student to let them know where he thinks they are, together with the midterm grade that he put in based on basically their relative performance so far. But that forcing himself to write those sentences is a useful exercise, right? It's not a final statement or anything. It's just a general where I think you're at. And I agree, midterm grades are always a difficult part of mastery grading, because if we went straight across, it would be everyone had an F or something along those lines. And you don't want to do that. So just reiterating a few points our panelists have made, you definitely don't want to do something like that. But you do want to communicate a lot with students, because here's something I found is very true about mastery grading. Students have a sense of proportion in a percentage-based class, and they have a feeling for where the incentives are. Oh, I should be about here. I should be doing about this. I can recover from this, but I can't recover from that. They have no sense of what those incentives or sort of where they should be at in a mastery graded course. And so you need to say a lot more to them. You need to encourage them a lot more and say a lot more about, here's about where I think you should be right now. You know, you don't have to be there. You got options, but if you're not here, make sure you're doing more reassessments or something along those lines. That sort of encouragement and norming, where should you be at? How do you know where you should be at, is really important. All right, and so we still have time for a few more questions if anyone would like to ask them. Let me suggest, since I don't see anything in the Q&A right now, I believe, yes, so if you would like to ask our panelists a question out loud, you can raise your hand. You can hit the raise hand button, and I will see that, and we can allow you to ask that out loud briefly. So if you would like to do that, we should be able to do so now.
David, there's a question in the chat.
Oh, there's one that just showed up in
the Q&A rather.
Yep, and it is, what does Canvas report as a current grade, or does it?
So Canvas, I just recently discovered, has the option to do grading schemes, but they tend to be strictly based on percentages. So I do not do that. I do not use that feature of Canvas, especially because I'm consistently battling my students that their 98% of their PPP points does not mean they're passing. So again, I just keep referring them back to the syllabus all the time. I have a how do I get the grade I want page in the syllabus on Canvas that says A equals 25, B equals 23, or you know, C equals 21, whatever the numbers are. And I just keep pounding on that, and I tell them, go, how many do you have? Well, this is where you need to go. So it does give you grading options, and there's some flexibility that you can create your own grading scheme, but I believe it's tied entirely to the percentage on the main assignment gradebook.
And we have had a few questions about other LMSs, D2L, Brightspace, things like this. I don't believe that our panelists have experience with any of those. Is that correct?
We have experience not finding anything for D2L.
Yeah.
Mostly, which is really interesting because they announced a huge partnership as being the mastery grading supplier for some big organization, or mastery learning actually. I think their definition of mastery is more along the lines of K-12, where you actually go through the content along a mastery path, and it's a question of completion. So it's not this kind of mastery grading as far as I know. If you want to, Kate Owens is desperately wanting people to come together to figure out how to make D2L work. So I would definitely reach out to her because she's trapped in D2L world as well.
Just a general word of advice: if you don't know how to manage your LMS, there's almost always nice people at the other end who will help you answer your question. If you don't want to know whether the feature is available, obviously look in the user guide. But beyond that, you might look at K-12 instruction, because K-12 education is picking up on standards-based grading. How far have you gotten in being able to write the equation of a line? That's coming up in some school districts being normed. So if they have training for it, they might be able to help you.
I would actually say that in many ways, K-12 is ahead of us in terms of using standards-based grading. But it also, it often looks very different, or the expectations are very different, especially at the high school level. And so be careful with comparing that. There is something, there's a question here. Do you keep track of tokens, or really, do you keep track of other information using your LMS in this way?
I do. I have an assignment called Rewrite Token 1. I have an assignment called Rewrite Token 2. I have an assignment called Rewrite Token 3, and an assignment called Rewrite Token 4, and they're optional. And you just attach the rubric for everything to it, and whatever they improve in, and that will count toward their mastery.
I do it slightly differently. I have a token count assignment, and it's just literally how many tokens do you have and how many are you earning. And in the comments, I always put, you know, because they all start off with 3, and then if they earn 1, I'll say, you know, earn token for quiz 1, or for quiz 1 rewrite, use token for this. And so there's a history that the students can see, and I just increment the grade up and down, and I make sure it's not counted as part of the final grade, so it doesn't affect their PPP points.
Yes,
I do want to, I'm sorry, go ahead, Taylor.
Yeah, I do something similar to Sharona. There's a grade column with the number of tokens the student currently owns. And I also use a Google form that they use to spend tokens, which keeps track of the tokens there for me as well. That's kind of the master. And then I just update Blackboard for the students to know.
And I'm going to briefly share my screen again, because it occurred to me that there's something that we've mentioned a lot of, but we may never have actually shown this to everybody, which is we keep mentioning things like EMRF, or a 4-level rubric. This is Robert Talbert's design of this, which I forget where it originally came from. But this is an example of a rubric, a 4-level rubric you could use to report sort of level of mastery to students. I think many of us have said we probably would go to fewer levels, but this is a common one, and it's worth knowing if you're hearing about it. The fundamental question is, does this work demonstrate fundamental understanding of the concept? If yes, you're at an either E, excellent or exemplary, or M, meets expectations. If the answer is no, this does not demonstrate understanding of the concept, you're either at an R, needs revision, or F, which many people have said change to N. N for not yet, or N or I for insufficient evidence, meaning not enough evidence to demonstrate relevant work or something that would be relevant progress. So you'll hear many of us referring to something like this. I often cut off the E and use only an M, R, or N to report, yes, you made it, or no, you didn't, but here's a little commentary on whether you need to revise or blow it up and start fresh. So I will stop that. We're coming close to the end, so if you have any additional questions, now is the time to type them in. Panelists, do you have anything that you have thought of that hasn't made it out yet that you'd like to make sure gets out there?
The only other thing I'd comment, if anyone is doing coordinated courses, Canvas does support all of this in a blueprint feature. So feel free to reach out if you have to, or even for yourself, if you have to do this in multiple sections. Looking into the blueprint feature is really good because you can set up an assignment once and push it out to all the sections, and it's a pretty nice feature.
Anything else from our panelists?
I would say if you're new to mastery grading or just getting started, you know, we've said it a couple times, but yeah, keep grading the gradebook and how you assign grades simple as possible. If you only require mastery of some things one time, and that could save you your first time through.
And then by doing something like that, you are going to get some advantage from mastery grading. You may find later that you can do things better, but you're going to see some real advantage from that, even if you do sort of a limited implementation of mastery grading. It's well worth it. Don't throw yourself in to something brand new with a class you've never taught before. I really wouldn't recommend that.
Yep, just again, if it's your first time, one of the things that saved me my first time is I wanted to write the standards and I wanted them to work. And so what I did is I just took my quizzes and my exams category and I smushed them into an SVG category of my grades. And I let that be something, and I still had a homework category and I still had a web work category. So it was really easy then to track the attempts, like as a sort of summative or after we've learned it assessment, and just sort them by categories inside of the quiz test. And that's just a limited way to start in a sort of hybrid way.
It can be very helpful to, or very necessary to split out your understanding of different types of assignments like that and think of it as, well, they're all just evidence, right? They're all evidence of mastery. And so we may call them by different names, but they're sort of all contributing to one central pool of what have you successfully done. All right, and I think, yeah, this will be our last question. This is, how many times do you require mastery per standard? Does it depend on what level of the course and what standard it is? I think we all vary in how we do that. And this is related to some of those options Sharona mentioned in the Canvas gradebook too.
Yeah, I actually have 3 things I do. Most of my standards are 2 times mastery on mastery assignments. One of my standards in statistics is 1 times mastery. And it's just pretty much, do you do the presentation or not? And then I have my PPP standard, which is just accumulate enough points on all this other stuff that I want you to do, and you get mastery for that.
I second that. 2 or 3 highest standards I keep. Sometimes if their highest standard is a 0 or an F or an N, I have to lower their grade by like a letter or a half letter. It depends on what scheme I'm using.
And I'm sorry to interrupt, but I actually just recalled we do need to end this session because we're going immediately to our goodbye session. We don't have a break right now. And so thank you for being here. We are going to see you at the last link. If you'd like to join us, it's going to be very brief. And so we will see you there. And thank you to all of our panelists.